Good evening. Welcome. Welcome to our third annual Unity in Community Fall event. My name is Bobby Mark, and I'm the president of the Beaver Dam chapter of AAUW. The American Association of University Women, or AAUW as we're known, is an international organization that has been dedicated to equity for women and girls since 1881. We work to improve the lives of women and girls through education, research, and advocacy. AAUW trains women to negotiate for better pay and benefits. They train them to pursue leadership roles. AAUW advocates for federal and state laws to ensure equity and to end discrimination. And AAUW is one of the biggest supporters of students in the world. Last year alone, AAUW provided more than $6 million in funding to 320 individual scholars and projects. In addition to hosting local community programs like this one, our local AAUW chapter has provided scholarships to graduating high school seniors since 1934. In recent years, we have added scholarships to women returning to MPCT. We have provided $30,000 in scholarships to local students in the last 5 years alone. We raise all of this money for our scholarships from our annual basket auction, which takes place every October. It is a lively evening that includes a delicious dinner, door prizes, used book and puzzle sale, a silent auction, and a professional auctioneer selling a wide variety of gift baskets. If you're interested in joining us on Wednesday, October 16th, to have fun, support local scholars, and get a jump on your Christmas shopping, see me or any other AAUW member before you leave tonight. As I mentioned earlier, this is our third Unity in Community program. The purpose of this program is not political, but to provide education and awareness about a topic affecting the community. Each year we have started with a summer community book read, and then we have hosted an event each September related to the themes of the book. This year's book is entitled Milked: How an American Crisis Brought Together Midwestern Dairy Farmers and Mexican Workers. And tonight's program just happened to coincide with Hispanic Heritage Month, which is celebrated from September 15th to October 15th. We'd like to say we planned that, but we did not. Okay. So before I introduce tonight's moderator, there are a few people I need to acknowledge. First, I want to thank the Unity in Community Committee and their chair, Annette Camps. Yeah, she deserves a round of applause. They all do. They have worked diligently for almost an entire year to create the wonderful event that we're having tonight. By the way, wait until you see what they have planned for next year. It'll knock your socks off. Next, I'd like to welcome one of our esteemed state AAUW board members. We have with us from Madison, State Program Chair Cleo Baruth Kritz. Thank you. And did Leslie make it? I didn't see. Oh, and thank you. And also our state DE&I Chair, Leslie Brensell, all the way from Janesville. So thank you, Leslie. Didn't see you come in. We also want to thank the Beaver Dam Area Community Foundation for their generous financial support. I should also mention that they are having a social fundraising event next Saturday at AAUW Brewery from 2 to 8. There will be door prizes, there is live music. AAUW is donating $1 per pour for the foundation. There will be some basket auctions and a 50-50 raffle and all kinds of fun stuff. So stop on down to AAUW Brewery next Saturday afternoon. We'd also like to acknowledge the Beaver Dam Area Community Theater for allowing us once again to use their beautiful facility. I want to thank definitely. Thank you, BDACT. I also want to thank Good Karma Broadcasting for their continued sponsorship, including the live stream of tonight's program. This evening will be recorded and made available to the public on dailydodge.com. There's also a YouTube link listed on the back of your program. Thanks to Justin Wyleski, WBEV's content manager, who is managing tonight's live stream, and Kevin Haugen, WBEV's news manager, who will be our moderator for the evening. Finally, I wish to thank Ruth Conniff for being with us tonight and for her illuminating book. Now I will hand the mic over to Kevin Haugen from WBEV, who will be moderating tonight's program.
Thank you, Bobby, and how about a round of applause for Bobby and the AAUW for putting together this important event and important conversation that we're set to have this evening. I am going to provide a brief overview of what we will be doing tonight in the order of events before I welcome up to the stage our special guest speaker this evening. I also just want to thank all of our guests here in attendance in person for taking the time to come out to the Beaver Dam Area Community Theater to be a part of this, again, important dialogue, and for those watching online, for those who could not make it in person. But first, again, I will remind our audience here that up first is our special guest speaker, Ruth Conniff. She will spend about a half hour talking about the things that we read in the book over the last couple of months. Following that, we will welcome up a panel of specialists who will share a little bit about themselves and their professional experiences with the topics that we will be covering tonight, and any comments and responses to Conniff's speech here this evening. And I will be asking them a prepared question too, to kind of enlighten all of us about this topic as well. Following that, we'll break for about 15 minutes, and on your packet that you received coming in here tonight, there's a little bottom tear-off sheet that you'll be able to write a question that you probably have formulated over the course of reading the book, or even maybe come up here tonight and want to come in with an open mind and come up with a question here. So you have an opportunity to write those down. Well, those will get passed to me, and we will ask our panelists those questions and get feedback and input from them as well. And then we'll have some closing announcements as well this evening. But without further ado, I want to welcome up to our stage our special guest speaker this evening, Ruth Conniff. Let's give it again here for Ruth Conniff.
Well, whoops, I can't see out my reading glasses if I look at you. Thank you so much for having me. Can I pull this down a little? Thanks to Bobby, Kevin, Andrea, and Annette. Andrea and Annette came and visited me at the office of the Wisconsin Examiner, which is the state news outlet that I edit in Madison, right next to the Capitol. We had coffee together and a really fun conversation, and they asked me to come and speak to you, and I am delighted to be here and talk to Wisconsinites about this very Wisconsin issue of immigration and our dependence on an immigrant labor force that makes up, when I wrote my book, the latest estimate was about 80% of the labor on Wisconsin dairy farms is performed by immigrants, most of them undocumented. So I got very, very interested in that topic. At the time, I was the editor of the Progressive magazine, and right when Donald Trump became president, my husband and I decided that it was time to leave the country. So we took our 3 girls and we moved to Oaxaca, Mexico for a year, which was a great, wonderful experience. And we just had this very warm feeling about Mexico. And it was interesting to me that at the same time we were getting ready to leave, I read an article in the Wisconsin State Journal that described the journey of a family from southern Mexico in the neighboring state of Veracruz who were packing up their truck and getting ready to drive 3,000 miles out of their little town in Durand, where ICE raids had made them very nervous, where their kids were constantly afraid that the parents would be snatched off the street and never see them again, and where just the mood, the political climate had become hostile to immigrants in a way that was really sad for them, because they had worked happily on this dairy farm for more than a decade, and their 2 little boys were born in Wisconsin and went to school and had friends. And they decided that nonetheless they couldn't keep doing what they were doing. And so I read their story in the State Journal. It was written by Alex Starr, who's a Wisconsin Watch reporter. And I was so fascinated by it because this family was moving back to Mexico at the same time that my family and I were going to go and live there for a year. So I got in touch with that reporter. And I talked to her, and she put me in touch with all of her sources. One of her sources, Sean Duvall, was a Spanish teacher in the high school in Alma, Wisconsin for many years. And I know that she's friends with a couple of people at least who are here tonight. Wonderful, warm person, and had become kind of the linchpin between dairy farmers in her area and the workforce that had come mostly from Mexico to work on their farms. And so through Sean, I developed more and more contacts, and I was able to start focusing on this story of this very interesting and underreported deep relationship between these two groups of rural people, one in Mexico and one in the upper Midwest, who had been working together for a couple of decades. And so I got very fascinated by that. So this is the cover of my book, and it shows John Rosenau, who is a great friend of Sean Duvall's and a farmer in western Wisconsin, and his employee, Roberto Tecpile, who came from Veracruz and has been working for him for many years now, helping to manage his farm. And we can go to the next slide. This is Luisa Tepole. She is the woman that I read about in the Wisconsin State Journal before we went to Mexico. And I caught up with her. I found that same truck that they had driven from Wisconsin all the way home. And here she's standing in the garden of the home that they built with the money that they made milking cows in Wisconsin. And she told me about her life. When I found her through Sean's contacts, I took a bus from Oaxaca to Veracruz and met her on this day. She told me that her kids were eating food that they were growing in their garden, that their extended family lived all around them, that the cousins would run by and call for the kids, and the kids would run outside and play. And they had this incredible sense of relief that they were not living in fear, that they had this sense of freedom there. And also, she explained to me what is a classic story of circular migration, which is that they were never in the United States because they had an American dream. They had a Mexican dream. And like generations of Mexican migrant workers who have come here since the Bracero program during World War II to pick crops, follow crops, and go back to Mexico, they had come to the United States to earn some money so that they could build their house. Her husband got a job driving a cab when they got back. And, they just built up a nest egg, which is a very typical thing, and had always intended to go back. Because of the militarization of the U.S.-Mexico border, that classic pattern has been interrupted. And really the result of that is that there are many more immigrants living here for longer and longer stretches of time because it's so hard and so expensive to go back and forth across the border. So she felt, it was interesting to me, and I thought would be maybe surprising to a U.S. audience, felt really relieved and happy to be back in Mexico. Her kids were teased in school because their Spanish was not great, and they sounded like Wisconsinites when they spoke Spanish. But the teacher had been working with them, and things were going better by the time I saw her, and they were adapting well, and so they were feeling happy there. So my next slide shows so my book is about two crises that brought together Midwestern dairy farmers and Mexican workers. The first of these is the farm crisis. Wisconsin has lost more than half its farms since the early 2000s, 1 or 2 farms a day. We were the #1 state for farm bankruptcies when I wrote my book. We've been in the top 3 consistently. So that very intense pressure on dairy farmers to get big or get out has driven a lot of family farms out of business. And for other farms, they've grown very rapidly from 50 cows to 100, 200, 300, 500, 1,000 cows in a short period of time. And what's interesting about sort of the story of the way that Mexican workers came to fill the labor gap in that situation is that it's only been over the last couple of decades. So you can really kind of go back and talk to the first people who hired Mexican workers. And they can tell you about their struggle to find U.S. workers who were willing to come and help them take care of the cows on their farms. It's not an easy job. And there are a lot of farmers who have, lived this life for a long time, but who are finding that young people in their area are not interested in getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and shoveling manure and milking cows around the clock. Because dairy work is a year-round, it's every day, all around the clock kind of work, there is no, and I think this is a really important point, there is no such thing as a visa for that kind of work that we offer to foreign workers. So the dairy workers who came to work on Wisconsin and Minnesota dairy farms are people who had come to do seasonal work through an H-2A visa, had been on Christmas tree farms in western Wisconsin, heard about jobs in dairy, started moving over, and then I talked to a lot of farmers who talked about just the incredible relief that they felt when they were able to hire people who wanted to do these jobs. So the one crisis, the farm crisis, and that get big or get out pressure is one of the big things that drove this story of the meeting of these two groups of rural people. The other one is on my next slide. The other thing I was going to say, I put this slide of these cows up to remind me that one of the statistics that fascinated me when I was writing my book is that as we went from 16,000 farms in 2004 to fewer than 7,000 farms now, the number of cows on Wisconsin dairy farms stayed exactly the same at 1.2 million. They're just moving onto bigger and bigger farms, many of them indoors and into big facilities. So you don't see those black and white Holsteins dotting the landscape as much when you drive through rural Wisconsin anymore. And that's the trend, that get big or get out trend that's happening to our state. So then my next slide is the other crisis, of course, is the so-called immigration crisis. Okay, this is not like, this is an extremely timely topic, as it turns out right now. When I wrote my book, there was a lot of pressure on immigrants. And, Donald Trump began his first campaign for the presidency by talking about Mexicans in a really insulting way. And we were worried about that when we went to Mexico. And actually on the first day at school, my oldest daughter had a friend, a young classmate who became a friend, come up to her and say, "Don't worry, our president is an idiot too." So people were very understanding and friendly to us, in spite of the fact that this was a news story. We were constantly hearing these things about Mexicans said by our president. But what's being called an immigration crisis still, and it's even a bigger, talking point in this election cycle, is not in any way, shape, or form a crisis from the point of view of the farmers in my book. And they, as Bill Trown, who's a soft-spoken farmer in western Wisconsin, put it, we need these people. I mean, there's a real sense of understanding that it is, 70–80% of the labor force on dairy farms. So it's a very different viewpoint on what it means for undocumented workers to cross the border and come looking for jobs in the United States. Without them, this industry would go belly up overnight. I mean, there's no question about it. So on the other side, Mexicans sent home about $52 billion from U.S. jobs to help the Mexican economy. That's 4% of Mexican GDP. That's more than petroleum in the major petroleum producing country. So not for nothing, the Mexican president has called these workers who are in the United States living heroes. They're propping up the economy of their country. They're really carrying the two countries' economies on their backs. They are essential to dairy and to all of agriculture and hospitality and food service and construction. So many industries in the United States, and they're building their hometowns. They're sending money home. They're employers. Many of the folks who are really keeping their heads down, kind of humble workers who aren't really seen a whole lot here, they're employing a bunch of people back home, and they're building businesses and homes. So it's an untold story, or at least not considered enough. So my next slide is this group of farmers that I traveled to Mexico with in 2019. At the end of the table in the white t-shirt is Stan Linder, who's a dairy farmer who has a dairy farm in Stockholm, Wisconsin, and he was a long-haul truck driver for a while. So when Sean Duval, who I mentioned earlier, the Spanish teacher who served as a translator on the farms in her area, had this brainchild. She was going to start a nonprofit called Bridges Puentes, and she was going to help farmers, first of all, try to help them learn Spanish, and then secondly, try to build cultural understanding and teach English to farm workers. She ran classes at night out of her classroom at the Alma High School. They were poorly attended by people who are working really hard and exhausted. And so the farmers were not making amazing progress on their Spanish. So she decided that she would take them for a Spanish immersion program in Cuernavaca, where she had gone for a Spanish immersion program. So they went for a week, they lived with families, they learned Spanish, and then they did a little tour of the area, and they just had some extra time, so they visited with some of the families of the workers who were back home working on their dairy farms. And it was an incredibly moving experience for them. They didn't realize how appreciated they would be by the family members of their workers. They had people come up and hug them and want to show them what a difference the money that their relatives were making, milking cows, was making in their community. So they saw homes being built and businesses, and they met these family members, and that caused them to decide they were going to go every year. So this is the 2019 trip. They go every year. It started in 2011, I want to say. 2001. It started in 2001. And Stan always drives. Next to him is Mercedes, who's taken over the directorship of Bridges Puentes from Sean Duvall in the green T-shirt. Next to her is Stan's granddaughter. At the other end of the table, the big tall guy is John Rosenau. And then I'm sitting next to him. And then Carrie Schultz, who is a member of a congregation in Minnesota and gotten to know a lot of Mexican folks who had moved into her area and heard about this trip. She's not a dairy farmer herself, but she wanted to come. So we were having dinner on this night of the trip. The first night that we arrived, we walked into a restaurant, first encounter with the host there and the Mexican workers who were coming to see us. And these two women came running up to Stan and hugged him and plunked down a bottle of tequila in front of him. And he and his granddaughter proceeded to polish it off during that dinner. And they were just having a great time laughing and joking with each other. They were making fun of his Spanish, which is not great. They said, do you want to dance with some wide women in Mexico? Because apparently he had said he liked dancing with mujeres anchas. But it was clear that they had a years-long relationship, a really fun relationship. So he was our guide, and we bounced around these rutted roads in this steep mountain area in Veracruz and visited all of these families. So then my next slide is part of that trip. This is a group of folks that we were visiting, family members with, seeing their homes. Chris Weisenbeck, who's a farmer who went on one of the very first Bridges Puentes trips, talks about when he first arrived in this little town, San Juan Texcocan, where his workers lived, he saw all these neighbors outpouring a cement foundation and helping to build a house. And he said it just hit him. It was like he was walking back into his own childhood in the 50s and 60s growing up in Wisconsin. And he said, it's neighbors helping neighbors. It's small town Mexico, small town USA, same thing. And that feeling of this shared agrarian past of people who work hard physically and really know what it means to farm is an interesting, serious cultural connection between the Mexican workers and the dairy farmers who I met and write about in my book. So let's see what the next slide is. Here's Stan delivering a load of gifts from workers in Wisconsin to family members in Mexico. So, you know, the workers on his farm and the other farmers' farms were still up. It was the polar vortex. It was freezing cold, and they were, his worker Clara called because she couldn't start the trucks because it was so cold, and he talked to her while he was standing in her very sunny garden looking at the house that she was building. There were tons of gifts that were sent both directions, and Stan was in charge of unloading all the gifts to Mexico and then schlepping all the gifts from Mexico back to the family members in the U.S. because it's very hard to cross the border, and so people are separated for a really long time. Next slide. This is Fatima Tepole. This is the papeleria. It's a school supply store that she built with the money she made milking cows in Minnesota. I called up the farmer who employed her on her cell phone from that store, and he said that she was one of the best employees he'd ever had in his life. He gave her an oil painting of cows, which she hung in her home, and it had this kind of broken Spanish inscription on the back thanking her for working for him. But she was able to start this business because of the money that she made milking cows. Then the next slide. This is Blanca Hernandez and her brother Mariano and his wife. Blanca crossed the border 4 times. Once she smuggled herself in the trunk of a car and nearly suffocated. She worked for Bill Trown, who's the soft-spoken farmer I talked about earlier, and he cries when he talks about how she helped him on his farm, which had suddenly expanded, and he was having a lot of trouble keeping up. And she was very organized and kind of a leader and got everything together. And also she and her friend who worked with her named all the cows, which she found very touching. They knew who they were. Her brother put his kids through college working in the U.S. One of them is a mechanical engineer, one's a teacher. Blanca teaches at a bilingual Nahuatl Spanish school. A lot of the folks that I met were not, their first language was not Spanish, it was Nahuatl, which is the Aztec language. And she teaches at a bilingual school where they're, trying to keep that language and culture alive for kids. So she's just a very dedicated person and is dedicated to helping others. This is John Rosenau and one of the people who worked with one of his employees, and he's sort of looking at all this construction that's going on in the town. This is San Juan Texocan also. From the Mexican side, the economics of working in the U.S. are very simple. One of the workers I interviewed explained that he made $11 an hour on the dairy farm where he worked in Wisconsin, and he went back to Mexico where he now makes $20 a week working in a pallet factory. So there's no comparison. John Rosenau says Trump says Mexico is not sending us their best, but these Mexican towns are sending us their best when they send us their young men. They're leaders in their communities, they're employers, they're supporters of two economies. And, you know, we should admire them and respect them. Next slide is John Rosenau outside his employee Marco's home. Marco's one of 10 children. He's the youngest. His father burns firewood to make charcoal, which he sells. You know, you can see they live in these very modest circumstances. But by the time my book came out, Marco had built a new house for his parents, which is concrete and, you know, nice, and he had also built his own house. So he was really dedicated to sticking it out on John Rosenau's farm until he could get his parents into a better situation, and he did. Here is Carrie Schultz, the woman who was in the Lutheran congregation in Minnesota, and she had befriended this young man and his family in her area, and by surprise when we were there, the mother and grandmother of those kids gave her this traditional blouse of the town and gave her this kind of tearful speech where she thanked her for being a grandmother to the grandchildren that she had never seen. And it was very moving. Okay, so here's the elephant in the room. So in these rural areas of Wisconsin where I spent a lot of time when I was working on my book after we came back from Mexico, you know, overwhelmingly they voted for Trump. They voted for Trump in 2016, and they voted for Trump by even larger margins in 2020. So a lot of people have trouble figuring out why, because it is, as I said, you know, for the farm economy and for other industries too, heavily dependent on undocumented immigrants, which seems to be the campaign theme, especially now, once again in 2024. So I have a couple answers to that question, why. One is NAFTA. Farmers talk to me a lot about NAFTA and the fact that they didn't trust Hillary Clinton in 2016 and the Democratic Party, really either political party very much, but didn't like global trade deals and appreciated that Donald Trump talked about them being a bad deal for the quote-unquote forgotten men and women of America. And they do feel forgotten. People feel looked down on. They feel, you know, like nobody's really looking out for them. And it seemed like Trump was something totally new, that he was going to shake up the system, he was going to change things. And a lot of folks who I talk to are not thinking and breathing politics every day and sort of could put it at arm's length. If there were things that Trump said that they didn't like, they could distance themselves from that. But they had hope that he was going to make a radical change, and they need a radical change. It's a problem, I think, that neither political party has acknowledged the depth of the crisis for farms, for rural America, for Wisconsin. You know, it's incredible to see people having to sell off land that's been in their families for 100 years. And somebody really needs to address it, and the Republicans have stepped into that spot. They have remade themselves as this populist party, and it has some resonance. I don't know what's going to happen in 2024. The numbers look about the same, but it's odd and strange to hear J.D. Vance and Donald Trump saying things like, immigrants are eating your pets. And, you know, in Eau Claire, that they've ruined the city of Eau Claire. This is stuff that people know very well is not true. Last week, there was the one Venezuelan guy who was accused of a serious violent crime, but Derek Van Orden, the congressman in that district, rushed to Prairie du Chien to have a press conference and, you know, turn it into a campaign event to claim that American citizens are being kidnapped, raped, murdered by criminal, illegal aliens in an area that is heavily, heavily dependent on undocumented labor. So, you know, crime is lower among immigrants than it is among U.S.-born folks in our country. You know, as John Rosenau pointed out to my reporter Henry Redmond, who interviewed him about that Van Orden press conference last week, we have a lot of white people in this area who do bad things, but we don't generalize from that. And another interesting fact that I read today in Wisconsin Watch is that undocumented immigrants paid about $100 billion in taxes last year. And of that, a very large portion went to prop up our Social Security and Medicare systems. So if they are mass deported, we are going to have a whole lot of retirees who are going to be facing a huge shortfall because, of course, they pay into these programs that they can never themselves access. We don't talk about these things enough. It would also cause huge job loss to have a mass deportation. The University of Colorado recently did a study that showed that for every million unauthorized workers who were deported, about 88,000 Native workers would lose their jobs. It's not that suddenly all of these Americans are going to be filling these jobs milking cows and shoveling manure, as any dairy farmer in Wisconsin can tell you. But really, it's mechanization that's going to replace undocumented workers, and that is going to cost jobs for Native-born citizens as well. So all of that, I think, is important to keep in mind in this insane election season. But I felt in writing my book that it was a break from toxic partisanship, that I really felt like I was able to talk to people who were interestingly flexible to, 70, 80-year-old farmers who decided they were going to try to learn Spanish, they were going to drive all the way to Mexico, and they were going to get to know this group of people who they had a warm feeling for, and they realized they didn't know anything about. And I think those kinds of connections, that kind of feeling of that we're all in the same boat is really ultimately what my book is about. It's that, you have these two groups of rural people who are under pressure from global economic forces totally beyond their control, who have discovered that they're in the same boat. And that, I think, is very hopeful. I think the nonprofit Puentes Bridges is very hopeful. The work that they're doing is really an antidote to the kind of poisonous political atmosphere that we're living in right now. So where I go in my book is I go to talk about the food system and sort of the way in which, all of us are dealing with this massive mechanization and the feeling that, we have a far-flung food system that is vulnerable and that we need to think about what kind of economy would allow people to live more reasonable lives. Because the treadmill that farmers are on is not reasonable. And walking across the border or stuffing yourself in the trunk of a car to go live away from your family for 10 or 20 years to make money and send it home in the hopes of going back and having a life in the future is also not a reasonable, it's not a reasonable ask. Is this the very end of my slides? Oh no, here it is. Okay, so I have a chapter called The Future of Farming, where I traveled to the largest dairy farm in America called Fair Oaks Farms. It's a kind of factory farm funland in Indiana. 36,000 cows are there. You can take a little tour around. You can see the many, many pigs on this land. You can see the many, many cows. They have this factory farm-to-table restaurant. It's a very weird place. Apparently, they do a huge tourist business. But one of the most bizarre and interesting things that I saw there was the robotic dairy, which is basically a labor-free dairy room. So you go, the tour bus drives into it, you go up in what looks like an air traffic control tower, you look down on this mechanized environment where these cows are wandering around. They have a chip in their ear that opens gates so they can pass through. They're milked by a robot in a milking stall. And there's one young woman with an iPhone watching all of this from this tower, and she can run down and fix a gate if it breaks. But otherwise, there's nobody there. And that is the very eerie potentially future of farming. From that dystopian place, I went south to Kentucky to visit the great agrarian writer Wendell Berry, who gave me a very different perspective. I met his daughter, Mary Berry, who's trying to revive local meat processing in that area. They have a lot of grass and they have a lot of grazing cattle. And she has this vision of a more humane life and a connection between people and animals and the land and an ethic of stewardship that seems like a really good thing to think about right now for all of us. Their group, the Rose veal company that they started that is keeping these farmers alive and supplying chefs and others with this high quality meat, they were the only people to bring meat into West St. Louis during the pandemic, because all of the other, supply chain shut down. There was COVID hit the meat processors. They shut down. They also an undocumented workforce. And farmers were euthanizing their animals in the field, and the shelves were empty. So it's just a big illustration of the problem with having this very stretched global economy and very stretched food system, and they are trying to do something about it. So we need a more sustainable vision for our future, and Midwestern dairy farmers and Mexican workers both really get that. I think they really understand how unsustainable things have become. When we were in Oaxaca, I met an economist named Luis Rey, who also really gets that. He has a whole theory about the economy of human dignity and the importance of slowing down. And he tells this anecdote about how a U.S. economist came to visit him and was studying towns in southern Mexico. And he interviewed all these shopkeepers. He came back to Luis very excited. He said he discovered the root cause of poverty in southern Mexico, and it was a lack of ambition in the people. And Luis kind of turns that story on its head. And he talks about how this guy did these interviews, and he asked these shopkeepers what was their 5-year plan, what was their big dream, did they want to have the biggest business in town, did they want to have 3 businesses? And they said, not really. We, happy how it is. My neighbors would think it was greedy if we got too big. I'd like to close the shop at 4 and have coffee. So there was just a very different set of values. And what Ray argues is that we need to listen to that, because we don't live in a world of unlimited resources. And it's just, we need a more humane scale of life. Perpetual growth is a lie. So I think that's really ultimately kind of where my book took me, that we're in the same situation, we're in the same boat, we're all vulnerable, we all want to pursue happiness, and we need each other to help each other find our way. So that's where I'll end.
How about one more round of applause for Ruth Conniff? At this point, I would like to welcome up our 4 panelists this evening, and get yourself situated at the table here. And as everyone's getting comfortable in their seats, I will let our panelists introduce themselves, and if they are so inclined, share any information or personal or professional experiences with the topic that we are here discussing tonight. I will start on my left here, and we will just work our way down the table. So I believe Allison here is on my left here, so we'll start with you and then just work our way down the table.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Allison Fao. I'm the bilingual regional dairy educator from UW Madison Extension. I work in 5 counties. I work in Jefferson, Rock, Walworth, Dane, and Dodge. I think I said the Rock in Jefferson. Yeah. So I'm from Colombia. I've been here, South America. So I've been here for 8 years. I have a bachelor's degree in animal science. I have a master in animal science too, in rumen physiology, in nutrition. I work here since 2 years ago, and I'm very, very happy to be here. I work with dairy since I came here to US. So I started in Colombia when I was doing my bachelor, working as a more in the line of the dairy industry, and I came here doing an internship in an organic dairy farm in Colorado, where I worked for 1 year doing different kind of things and learning how all this the dairy industry here in the US, because obviously in my country we don't have these big farms that you guys have here. So for me it was a shock come here to a dairy who has 25,000 cows in production. So for me it was like a shock, but that was a very good experience for me. After I finished that, I keep working in other dairy farms as a manager and supervisors, working in different areas at the dairy farms, and also training new employees and working with them, just translate all the protocols and teaching them and training how to do the better job and how they can feel belong to the dairy. After that, well, I do my master at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and now I'm here in Wisconsin because why not? Here is the dairy land, right? So I think I'm in the right place to work with dairy. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Amanda Garcia. I'm here from Noble Community Clinics. We were formerly known as Family Health La Clinica. We are a community health center. We have clinic locations, and 5 clinic locations in Stevens Point, Beaver Dam. We just opened medical and behavioral health. We've had dental here for a long time. We are also in Watoma, Mauston, I think it says, and Friendship. That's the other one that I almost missed. My department that I work under, I'm a community health worker. I work as a liaison between our agricultural workers that migrate from all over, majority of them from Texas, Florida, California, Puerto Rico, and then we do see some of those H2A workers that Ruth had alluded to earlier. And yeah, so I work with a mobile health unit. We bring medical services, doctor, medical assistants, nurse, and myself to all of the farms and or companies, canneries, such as Seneca's. I think everybody is aware of Seneca. Lakeside Foods is another one we service. And then we also work, a lot of the H2A workers that we serve work on tree farms. We travel all over the state of Wisconsin, from Cumberland, New Richmond area, down to Janesville, over to Door County, up to Gillette. We get to see the entire state, so it's really beautiful. The rest of our clinic does also serve the community. We're here for everyone and anyone, regardless of their ability to pay or their insurance status. We work with everyone to make sure that everybody has the medical care that they deserve. I was born and raised here in Dodge County, so it's really nice to be back here. I moved up close to the Watoma area, but I'm happy to be here and talk about this important topic.
I'm Betsy Ramsdale. I'm the bilingual family liaison for the school district. I've been a teacher since 1996, and I've been in Beaver Dam for 17 to 18 years. I started taking Spanish in 9th grade and decided to be a Spanish major, and so I studied abroad in Mexico. And I spent 2 semesters in Puebla, and that's where I fell in love with Mexico and Mexicans. And I've been speaking Spanish ever since, and it's a pretty good gig. My role now for the district, which this is my 4th year, is to primarily work with the Spanish-speaking families to translate documents that they need to understand district rules and policies and how grades work, how attendance works, and make sure they have, enrollment paperwork, things like that. But in doing so, I get to know them really well and their dreams, what's brought them here and their challenges. And I seek to, remove language barriers that they would have in our community of limited Spanish speakers. Just quick stats, right? The school district, Beaver Dam has about 16,000 people and is 84% white. The school district has 3,100 students. 21% of them are Hispanic, meaning they come from a Spanish-speaking family. And then 5% of them are ELL, which means they're learning English and, struggle with academic English and need extra support to succeed. So 1 in 5, right? 1 in 5 people in our community are Spanish speaking. Do they have papers or not? Not our business. But if they don't and they were all to disappear, that's 1 out of every 5 people in our community would just be gone. And all the impact that they have on our lives would also be gone.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Claire Skivington. Really nice to see so many people here today. Thank you to everybody who organized this. I'm glad I got to go last because I got to learn how awesome the people sitting next to me are. I'm excited to hear more. I'm an attorney with QBS Law. We have offices here in Beaver Dam as well as in Mayville. I'm primarily in the Mayville office. And I'm not currently working as an immigration attorney, but I have worked in immigration in the past, and as an attorney as well as in a translating capacity before that. I lived in Mexico when I was 6 years old. I moved to central Mexico with my family, and then grew up in Texas after that. So really, Mexican culture specifically has always been a part of my life, although it is not my culture or my ethnicity. I also actually have a business called Amor y Asana. It's yoga in Spanish. So just always looking for ways to kind of intertwine what I'm doing with different communities. And have worked with, I don't know if anyone here has worked with WIBIC before. It's primarily out of Madison, but they do have branches all over Wisconsin. And it's a women's business organization. So working with Spanish-speaking business owners, primarily women, but not necessarily. We're happy to work with men as well. That's something I kind of just do on the side. Free educational seminars, specifically for Spanish-speaking business owners. That's a really big passion of mine. Like I said, right now I'm not practicing immigration law, but I do still work with a lot of Spanish-speaking clients, particularly looking to grow their businesses and really kind of create that life and that stability here. Like Ruth mentioned, not everyone's dream is to stay here, but for many that is the goal. So just being able to participate in that way has been really wonderful. I'm looking forward to what we have to come tonight. Thank you guys.
But before we break, to have our audience here have a chance to write down their questions for our panelists and our special guest speaker, Ruth Conniff, tonight. I have the pleasure of asking each one of our panelists a question, and I'll just start the way that we introduced our panelists tonight here. So that means we're starting with Allison and working our way down through the rest of the table. So Allison, my first question here for you is, how has the dairy industry changed to accommodate the migrant workforce?
It's a tough question. So it's been changing. Things have been changing. Why? Because the owners of the farmers, the owners of the farms and the managers and people in charge of those farms are learning and understanding how important are these Latino employees. So we have to understand that they are not just come from Mexico, they come from Nicaragua, South America, other different places, just because obviously the economy in those countries are not the best. So they are just coming to what we were talking before, just to get some money, go back to their countries and get a better life. So right now the farmers are learning and they are understanding how keep them happy, keep them trained, and keep them like with the idea that they belong to the dairy. So because right now one of the big issues that we have in dairy is retention, labor retention. So what is it like? Obviously they are not paying enough money to them to keep them at that job. So what is happening right now is just big dairies are just trying to get some strategies to keep them there. So it's like learning how they can get benefits like, okay, every month we're gonna give them free milk, or we're gonna get at least a recognition, like the best employee this month would be this person. So that, and also training, keep training them about what they are doing, so they also understand why they are so important in the dairy industry. So I think that is changing. It's changing slowly, of course, because some of the big farms or small, like medium farms, because they are transitioning too fast, they don't understand the way that they should work, but they are keep learning a little bit. So it's been slow, but I think it's going in a good way to just help them more, these Latino employees, to keep them in that job and let them feel like we appreciate what they are doing, because nobody's gonna do what they are doing right now for us and for food security and all of that. So I think we are going in a good way, but just slow, a little bit.
Our next question this evening is for Amanda, and your question is, one myth is that undocumented workers are a drain on healthcare services. How do undocumented people obtain healthcare?
Thank you. So I feel that this is a very important topic, seen as Noble Community Clinics has a special department that I work in which is in charge of bringing medical services to the migrant and seasonal agricultural workers all throughout the state of Wisconsin, like I mentioned earlier. However, as far as we know, we don't serve or see a lot of undocumented workers. Our mobile health team goes out to canneries, tree farms, and we have just broken the barrier and are getting to serve field workers now with our mobile health unit. It's a big RV. It's a doctor's office on wheels. We have 2 rooms. We are able to do labs. We are able to do pretty much anything you can do in another doctor's office that's not on wheels, which is very exciting. We take our medical services to the workers at their employment or housing sites, and many of their housing sites are actually on the company's property. So in order to get onto that property, we have to build a relationship with the owners of the farms or the companies and be invited in. We can't just go anywhere we want. We have to be invited in. And so because most employers who hire undocumented workers are fearful of the repercussions, and understandably so, we are typically not allowed onto property to help serve them, even though our job is purely to provide health services and connect them with resources to better their quality of life. We really want to serve the people who help put food on every American's dinner table. We don't mean any harm. So back to the question, my understanding is that many undocumented workers do not receive any type of health care. The people that come to the United States for work are here to earn money, not to acquire large expenses such as medical bills, and many of them do not want to carry the burden of debt or utilize any federal or state programs for fear that it will be held against them if they ever decide to pursue citizenship. Even in my experience with agricultural workers, domestic and foreign, if offered the chance to see a doctor or work to earn a few extra dollars, I promise we never take the priority. They will always take that work unless it is a dire situation. They have an urgent concern, something along those lines. They are here to provide for their families or make a better life for themselves. Their health and well-being comes after that. Medical care here, as we all know, is very expensive, especially if you don't have insurance, and they often don't qualify for any assistance. Not to mention, our medical and any financial support system is very difficult for them to navigate, especially when there is that language barrier. I do want to be transparent, though. Some exceptions do apply. There is emergency Medicaid for when serious health events occur to help cover the costs for life-saving measures, but this is not something that's just given out on a whim. For example, a worker that I know of who migrated from the state of Texas and was not insured had a stroke while working here in Wisconsin. Through the social worker at the hospital, this person was able to acquire emergency Medicaid. Although they would not have qualified otherwise, and this helped cover the cost of the hospital stay and some rehabilitation, although the extent of the coverage, I'm not quite sure. The other exception is for women who become pregnant while they are here. These women are able to utilize Medicaid for the duration of their pregnancy and also for labor and delivery costs, but as soon as their child is born, they are no longer qualified for any sort of coverage, although their child, who is an American-born citizen, is eligible. So many times women do not receive any care after their child is born, but they will make sure their children do. The only other way undocumented workers can obtain health care is through community health centers like Noble Community Clinics, who are here to serve any person regardless of their insurance status or ability to pay, and we offer discount programs for those who fall below the poverty line. But many of these workers are isolated and unaware of the resources put in place to help them, or they are unsure if it's a safe place for them to go. So once again, often they go without. Just one more point, but Ruth actually touched on this, so I was really excited. I found this information in a document that was published in 2014, but the information is very interesting. According to the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, undocumented immigrants contribute an estimated $11.74 billion, so that was back in 2014, $11.74 billion to state and local economies each year. However, undocumented immigrants are not eligible for any of the state or federal or state benefits that their tax dollars help fund. Additionally, a few states have completed studies demonstrating that immigrants pay more in taxes than they receive in government services and benefits. A study in Arizona found that the state's immigrants generate $2.4 billion in tax revenue per year, which more than offsets the $1.4 billion in their use of benefit programs. Another study in Florida estimated that on a per capita basis, immigrants in the state pay nearly $1,500 more in taxes per capita than they receive in public benefits. The estimated contribution of undocumented workers has increased to $96.7 billion in federal, state, and local taxes as of 2022. Therefore, I can say confidently, undocumented workers are not a drain on the healthcare services at all. Thank you.
Our next question is for Betsy Ramsdale, and you kind of touched upon this a little bit during your introduction, but maybe there's a little bit more room to expand upon this topic, and that is describe the current ELL population in the Beaver Dam School District.
Sure. I've been here 15-ish years, and when I first started, most of our English learning students were from Mexico, and their parents came here. However, they came here, and they were born here. And so they grew up speaking Spanish at home with their parents until they came to school. Sounds like my aunts and uncles only changed Spanish to Polish, but whatever. And so they had to learn English and how to read and write English and still go home and communicate with their families in Spanish. The last 4 years, we've seen a rise in immigrants from Central America. Now we have students, families from Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala. We have a few from Venezuela, and I just met a woman from Ecuador and Colombia. So, in Cuba. So my experience with students is the younger they are, the faster they learn English, but the slower they learn to read and write. If they come here when they're older and they've already learned how to read and write in Spanish, they learn to read and write in English much more quickly. Do I have any data? No. That's all, what do you call that? It's just observational.
Our last question for our panelists here tonight, at least for my portion of the questions, is what kind of hurdles do undocumented workers face if they desire staying in the country legally? And this one is for Claire Skivington.
Thank you. I am going to talk about staying here, but first of all, let's talk about getting here. Raise your hand if you know that as of June of this year, you have to sign up for an interview via an app before you get to the border. Thank you. I like your shirt, yo. And that's something that we saw a lot with clients, not only coming from Central and South American countries, but also a lot of African immigrants as well come through that southern border and don't have a smartphone. So that creates an issue for detainment right away. Many people are fortunate. I shouldn't even say fortunate enough because there's some question on whether or not that detainment should happen in the first place. But who are then released to live and work in the United States, and from there is a lot of misinformation. I think staying here. I think one of the biggest issues with staying here is that misinformation. Many of the people who have spoken today have talked about that fear from employers as well as immigrants of seeking out resources with fear of repercussions. There's oftentimes some level of fear coming from a country of origin that has led someone to make the decision to immigrate to the United States. So they're already operating oftentimes on this trauma memory, this trauma brain. And it's really, really, really hard to seek resources when you are in this state of survival. I know I'm supposed to talk about the legal barriers, but I think it's impossible to talk about the barriers of staying in the country without talking about the emotional component. And how that leads into the legal process is when you're being interviewed, oftentimes you don't remember your experience. Oftentimes your experience changes based on memory. I think that we can all resonate with the fact that when you have an experience that's oftentimes very jarring, very traumatizing, under financial duress, social duress, language barriers, all of the other considerations, it's really hard to remember exactly facts of a story. And oftentimes people are here on asylum, pending asylum cases, which require what we like to call a credible story that it never changes. There's a human element of that, and I think it's a really, oftentimes, unfortunately, unrealistic expectation to have of immigrants when they're going through this process and telling their stories, and being vulnerable with a government agent that isn't necessarily always creating an emotionally safe environment. I think that leads into legal literacy. There's a reason that we're in business. It's hard to read the law for native-born citizens who have English as their first language. It's intentionally confusing. It's intentionally inaccessible, unfortunately. Things that are very, very small can oftentimes lead to huge, huge implications in someone's immigration status. For example, when you are here with a pending case, if you ever change your address, you need to report that to ICE. Obviously, with financial insecurity, addresses change a lot, and that's not something that's on a billboard. You wouldn't really know that unless someone told you. This isn't knowledge that you're born with on how to navigate this. Check-ins with ICE, things like that. Oftentimes, that kind of information is given to someone in English. So it's as good as not giving it to them at all. And sorry, I'm just looking at my notes here because I wanted to be in this order. But the other thing about the immigration process is that it's often indefinite. What that means is there aren't deadlines like we have in a traditional court system. In the branches of government, you would probably assume that immigration court is under the judicial branch, but actually, many of you may know it's under the executive branch. So that means that the court is an administrative court that has different regulations than our typical due process, which of course is the liberty that we are afforded as natural born citizens, or I shouldn't say we, those who are born in the United States have access to that traditional court system, if you will. The immigration court is completely regulated by the executive branch, which, whether you like the administration or not, is always changing. No matter what side of the aisle that you're on, there is always going to be change there. Even, two candidates of the same party could have different policies within their administration. So it's really not even always a partisan issue. It's just hard for these people who are just trying to follow the right processes to even keep up with the changing laws. Like I said, that app was just introduced in June. Many people were already on their journey on foot and didn't have access to the internet. Well, how are they supposed to know? The question of staying here, there's career limitations. Let's say you do have status. There are certain careers that you cannot pursue, not only because they require legal citizenship, but also because of cultural and language barriers. And I'll wrap up here because I think I'm going on a little bit long, but there are many, many, many legal considerations that go into immigration. It's completely impossible to answer this question concisely, but I will end with one other obstacle that is more of an indirect obstacle. I mentioned that I teach yoga in Spanish, and I think just the quality of life question. Ruth shared a story about a family wanting to go back to their country of origin, and I think that's oftentimes kind of this mental push and pull of what's the best thing for my family, what's the best thing for me as an individual, what's the best thing for my children, grandchildren, etc. Not having access to the healthcare, not having access to, raise your hand if any of your fitness classes are offered in Spanish. Raise your hand if going to fitness classes is an important part of your physical and mental health. It's important. And not to mention those things cost time, money, energy, resources. So, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the legal component, but it's a full picture, and I think that it would be remiss not to mention those things. So I appreciate your attentiveness, and I hope to get into it more.
At this point, we will break for around 10 to 15 minutes. The program handout you received tonight has a white little piece of paper stapled to the top of that handout. You'll get your pen and paper, pens and pencils ready to jot down your thoughts, questions, and if there's anyone directly you'd like to address with your questions, be sure to note that as well. We ask our viewers on the Daily Dodge TV stream to hang with us here. We will take a brief break, but I'm sure you're going to want to stick with us as we go through the Q&A section. There's be a lot of important information discussed there as well. For those here in the audience, please enjoy some cookies that are served by Beaver Dam High School students. Again, we'll reconvene in about 10 to 15 minutes. We are just about set to get started again, so I ask all of our guests in attendance here to find their seats, and we will reconvene our program this evening.
Wisconsin, to try to go around to farms and help people out because they
Translators?
they can communicate.
Yeah.
All right, also want to make sure that our Daily Dodge TV stream, I'm getting the thumbs up from Ninja, so I'd say we are ready to reconvene our program this evening. In this final segment, we'll be able to pose some questions that you in the audience here had a chance to write down on the sheets. There were quite a few that were written down and handed in, so we might not be able to get to every single one of them tonight. We know we have some people that came in from a further distance away than here in the city of Beaver Dam, so we want to be considerate of those who have a little bit of a drive on the way home. So maybe the AAUW will have an opportunity to post some questions that weren't asked tonight on their Facebook page in the future. Thank you very much. As we get another question in here. So again, we'll try to get to as many as possible in the time that we have left here tonight. But if not, I'm sure the folks with AAUW will do everything they can to try to get these questions to our panelists and our special guest speaker tonight to have a chance to answer those. So without further ado, I will ask our first question here. And this isn't addressed to anyone. So again, if they aren't addressed, I will just open it up to our panelists, our author here. And anyone can dive in right away, and somebody can jump in as well if they want to add any inputs or any other thoughts or comments to the questions that we have here. So the first question here, are the actions we, and they have in parentheses, native born, can take to make our communities more welcome to people who are not native born? Is it hard to know what it's hard to know what individuals can do? And again, I open that up to anyone who wants to jump in on that first question.
I'll jump in quickly, which is, I fielded this question on a panel that included John Rosenau, the dairy farmer who's on the cover of my book. And his suggestion was get to know somebody who's a recent immigrant to your community. Just be welcoming, just, break the ice, talk to people. That, I think, is a very simple, small thing, but a powerful thing.
Yeah, I'm agree with you, and we have different culture. So we are different, like cultural, we are so different. So I think it's a good idea to meet somebody that comes from another country, and you teach how your culture, and they teach you their culture, because I think that is the way that we create a community. It's not just it's just here and you have to learn how we live here. It's no, let's combine everything and let's work together and have a community. So, yeah.
Anyone else want to chime in, or we will, otherwise we'll move on to our next question. Oh, go ahead.
Be politically active. You vote how you want, but I always consider when I'm voting how my vote will impact those who cannot vote. Why can't you get a driver's license by passing a driver's test? Why do you have to have your papers in Wisconsin to pass a driving test and get a driver's license? Because if you don't have a driver's license, you can't get insurance. So there's a lot of people that are forced then to drive without licenses and to drive without insurance. And are we really going to tell them, well, you can't drive, that's breaking the law. So I say, change the law. Does that answer your question? I don't remember what the question was, but I wanted to get that in.
I do have another question, and honestly, Betsy, that ties perfectly into some of the comments that you were just making, and that is having a driver's license is so important. Is there any hope that these folks will again be able to legally drive? I know, changing the law is something that you mentioned, but is there any options or hope down the line that this could change?
I would say absolutely there is hope. There's been a real coalition effort among the Dairy Business Association, which is a pretty conservative group, and immigration advocates like Voces de la Frontera, which is a pretty left-wing group, to lobby the legislature to change that law, which it's only since 2007 that Wisconsin began denying driver's licenses to people. And the insurance went up, a lot of accidents with people who are uninsured, a lot of cops who wish that they knew who was on the road, but they don't know who they're walking up to when they make a traffic stop. So, that didn't used to be the case here. And we have new maps in the state. So we're going to see a different legislature. And I think that makes it very hopeful that things like that could change.
Another question here for our panelists. What are the legal implications for farmers who hired undocumented workers? And again, that's not addressed to anyone, so it's a heavy question. So I know if anyone wants to pass that off or dive right into that one, by all means.
Does the lawyer want to talk about it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's an uncomfortable question because I think one thing we can take away from tonight is that it's absolutely needed. It's an absolutely necessary industry. It's an absolutely necessary means of employment for employers and employees. I don't think this is going to be a very satisfying answer, but it's really, really, really hard to respond in a specific way because it depends on the status of your employees. Not every undocumented person is necessarily here illegally. I know that sounds kind of like an oxymoron, but there's a lot of in-between stages. Employment law can just, I don't mean to be rambling on, but it's just, if someone has a specific question about how it may impact their specific operation, I would love to get your contact info, and I feel like I just don't feel like in good conscience I can answer that question as an overarching statement because it's so specific to the situation. My best answer to that is if this is something that is of concern to you or someone that you know, definitely either let's set up a time to have an appointment or seek resources elsewhere. It doesn't have to be with me, but just having that conversation is the beginning of understanding what those implications might be on a case-by-case basis.
I think it's important to say that employers have not suffered any penalties, for the most part, for hiring undocumented workers. All of the risk is assumed by the workers themselves. And so the employers can have a don't ask, don't tell policy where they look at an obviously fake document and they're like, who's to say? And they feel protected. I don't feel that employers are feeling frightened. The workers not only risk their lives to get here and really are in danger getting here at all, but then are living in fear, with ICE raids. And, that's shifted in the Biden administration. There's much more of an emphasis on unscrupulous employers and allowing people to stay if they've been abused by an employer. That whole program came into place in the Biden administration, but that could change again. In the Trump administration, we had huge ICE raids all over Wisconsin and people were being rounded up. But I didn't see any employers who were feeling in danger. It was just the employees. And I think that's one of the reasons there hasn't been such a big motivation to do a whole lot about it.
Yeah, and also to understand that sometimes when they are, they don't have documents to work, and they get to a very bad, employer, so they can get very bad,
Exploited.
Yeah, so they could have very bad schedules, they can have bad payment just because you don't have any documents, so we are gonna be over you, so we don't worry about you. You have to work because you are here and you own me, kind of like that. So that is one of the big issues when employees, they don't have any document. So they feel like this person is gonna be hurt me, or I'm gonna work so hard because I don't have any papers, because they don't gonna pay me like the same like a legal person. And because if I get injured, nobody's gonna take me to the hospital, or nobody's gonna like care of me. So that is a big issue. So yeah, that is a big issue. But it's not in every dairy. It's just depend the person who owns the dairy and the, like the ideas, like, like all those kind of things. But sometimes happen and it's very bad. And it's for that you see some news about bad situations that happen in dairies, that they were living in a very bad situation. Like the employees are living in a very bad situations. They don't have bathrooms. They don't have anything. They work like 100 hours per week, things like that, just because they don't have papers. So people just get over them, and like, it's not fair. It's not fair.
Yeah, I think that's really important what Allison said, that there is labor trafficking. There's been a couple of big labor trafficking cases in Wisconsin where people were here on an H-2A visa in Georgia, and they were moved by an unscrupulous employer to Wisconsin. Now they're out of status, and their documents are taken from them, and they're told that they have no rights and that they need to be afraid they'll be deported. And there's wage theft. I mean, that's the really dark side of this whole arrangement, and there is a fair amount of that, as we're learning from like the New York Times investigation about the middle schoolers who were working in factories around the clock. I mean, there's some really dark stuff that happens when you have this gray economy you're not acknowledging, and you're not giving people, legal status.
And this is just happening now in dairy industry, in vegetable, in meat processing, everywhere.
Our next question, it ties up maybe a little bit into the first one about how we can make our communities more welcoming for immigrants, but how do you think we can combat the misinformation about immigrants in our community? Again, and that's open to all of our panelists here tonight.
Well, it's so important to talk about the reality. And in all these communities that have been targeted for, turned into campaign ads, like Eau Claire, Whitewater, Wisconsin, if you remember the big deal about the local police chief writing for help from the federal government. Turns out he didn't think that there was a crime wave. He was talking about the exact issue of driver's licenses. His concern was, we have all these unlicensed drivers. The state legislature needs to change that. So, when you talk to people in the communities, there's often not a lot of fear and upset about refugee resettlement or undocumented workers in the area. So I just think lifting up those stories is so important. I don't know what you've seen. I mean, I don't know what do you see in the school?
Everyone's on their best behavior around me. Because they know better. So that's kind of a problem that I have in my position, is I don't always see the dark side. Because of that, people know, oh, she works with the Spanish speakers, so they don't do anything negative around me, say anything racist around me. If they do, I find out about it later, other ways, not where I can.
It's a minority that I really reject the idea that this is bubbling up from, because I believe that in those communities, and I've visited them and talked to people, it is not driven by a community issue. It's a national political talking point that's being imposed on folks. And so I think it's so important to stay at the level of real people and real relationships. It's not true.
I think, too, it's a very vocal, obnoxious minority that doesn't represent our whole community. They just happen to be the loudest and the least fearful, and the rest of us, maybe you don't feel like standing up for it, because why bother? We know our neighbors, and we know they're good people. I'm not engaging. Do not engage.
Just meet people. Like, the community has to understand that everything is changing. Like, our community, and I was reading the other day that in 1990, the Latino population here in Wisconsin was like 90,000, and now in 2021 was 400,000. So it's like it's going up. So we have to understand that our community is changing with new culture. So don't judge. Like, I know for sure if one of you goes to Mexico or go to my country or go to Latin America, you're gonna be welcome. Like really, they're gonna make you feel like you are in a dream and you're gonna have fun. I think you have to do the same thing. You just have to stop to judge just because they don't speak the language, just because they look different, just because they, I don't know, dress different. Just stop to judge and teach your families like, hey, we are the same. Just we have different cultures and we have differences, of course, but we have to understand that we are a community, that we have to work together. So I think that is the best thing. And if you want, like, learn another language, why not? Learn Spanish, at least to say hola, you know? Because they do it, we do it when you come to our countries. Like, we learn English and say, hey, hello, to feel you like, oh, these people is very nice. So why you guys don't do the same in these small towns that they come to live here just because it's nice, it's peaceful. So do the same. Just don't judge and just meet those people and learn more about their culture.
You must be doing something right. And when I say you, I mean we, because I do live here. Because more people keep coming. And it's my experience enrolling new immigrant families in the district that they have come here because someone else in their family has come here first and liked it here. And that's all you have to do is be kind.
Yep. Never underestimate the power of a smile or a kind gesture or anything. They're human, just like all of us. It's no different.
Yeah.
And going back to the original question of how we can all help this effort of, like Allison put, creating that community, it's hard to know how to help without opening up a conversation and just getting to know a friend, regardless of their background. You learn more and more what that person needs and what that person likes and enjoys and is missing in their life, regardless of, with this immigration lens. And then you bring that to that experience of getting to know people, and then you'll know. And when I say you, I mean, I include me in that as well. That's the only way to find out how to help. Being uncomfortable, asking questions. I mean, I don't want to reiterate what's already been said, but that's the information right there that we need just from asking.
Our next question here this evening, what clout does the small farmers have with our government and immigration policies? Again, open to the panelists here tonight.
There's some clout. I mean, some of those, the problem is that the big ag groups represent sometimes a different set of interests. But certainly there are big, powerful agricultural lobby groups, and they have pushed for some kind of recognition of year-round low-skilled work, because that's what we're talking about. All of the people who are doing work that's not just seasonal, following the crops, are not able to get visas unless a very narrow band of technical visas. So there's been a lot of discussion of that in Congress, and I think it's not that they don't have clout. I think maybe the incentives are off, and then there was a near deal in the last year in Congress, but it failed because there was a real question about whether you were turning farmers into ICE agents. Basically, they would be the ones to hold the papers of the people who came to work for them, and there has been this exploitation, as Allison was describing, so that was a kind of a no deal. But I think the bigger problem is that immigration is just a really good political hobby horse, and so there's not the will to solve these problems, and that has overridden some very near misses on bipartisan deals. We almost had comprehensive immigration reform in 2014, and it fell apart. And so then when people try to get one thing done, like fixing this visa program, which is just a complete no-brainer, let's just take the 70% of the dairy labor force that's been here for 20 years and just say, okay, here's your work visa. You would think it would be so easy, but it becomes very complicated because it's tied to all these other issues, and there's a reluctance to fix it. So I don't know. I don't know if other people have thoughts about clout.
No, I'm thinking totally the same. And it's so hard for them when, for example, if a employee without papers wants to be legal after being like 30 years here, it's so hard for them to get to the process. It's longer because he has to put like in that process families and everybody, and it's so much money and it's so much time that they are like, my God, it's like $30,000 for one person because they have to pay a penalty just because they stayed 30 years without like any papers, and now you want to be legal. Okay, you have to pay for this and this and this. They are like, oh my God, like all of these. It's hard for them. It's very hard, and I know like some big groups are working to help them, because I think finally they found out that if we don't have them, who is gonna work in dairies? Who is gonna cook our meat? Who is gonna put our food in the plate? Nobody, because no too many people is gonna do that job. So, yeah.
All right, we have two questions here on this sheet. The first one would be directed towards Amanda, and that is, how is the Noble Clinic funded?
We are a 503C, I believe is what it is. So we do get government funding to provide medical services to anybody who is below the poverty level. We also do accept your everyday insurances. So it's not just low-income people that come to our clinic. We serve anybody and everybody that we can. But it is, we do get a lot of grants. And I think we are the only community health center in Wisconsin dedicated to serving the migrant and seasonal agricultural workers. So we get a grant specific for that. But then I believe just for being a federally qualified health center, there are grants for that as well.
Fantastic. The second question is for Ruth, and that is, does Ruth plan to write another book to answer questions she raised?
Yeah, I do want to write another book. I'm in a very full-time job right now running a daily news site, so I don't have as much time. I was able to take time off and finish this book, and I was so grateful. So yes, I am interested in writing another book, and I have some thoughts about, I got an award, the Studs Terkel Award for this book from the New Press, and I am interested in sort of the idea of work and how work is changing, how it changes people's lives, so I'm probably going to do something on that.
So maybe in another 3 or 4 years, we could have you back out here for
Yeah, there you
another AAUW event. Fantastic. Our time is quickly running out, so maybe we have time for just 1 or 2 more questions. But first here, who would we contact to support visas for year-round workers?
That's a federal issue. That's a federal issue, so you need to contact your representative in Congress. And you could contact, who is your congressperson here? I should know.
Scott Fitzgerald?
Fitzgerald? Yeah, I mean, there's no reason that Scott Fitzgerald shouldn't be hearing from people about this issue, because it is not a partisan specific issue. It is really an issue for our whole economy, our whole state economy. So I think it's really, really good for them to hear from people who want solutions and are tired of the demagoguery.
And remember, you put them there, so they work for you. No, you work for them. So you should guys talk to them and say, hey, we need this, we need this, we need this. The community needs this. It's not like, oh, you are there, so you are intouchable. They work for us.
If only.
I just want to touch on that really quick. So just to be clear, oftentimes the word visa is used interchangeably for just like status to be in the country. So the visa is what's used to get here. And like has been mentioned a few times, a lot of times visas do bring people here legally, and then that expires and then their status is no longer legal. So love hearing that people want to contact our representatives about that. I would also mention, ways equitable ways to then transition the people who are already working here, already in this country, you know, just how to transition that status as well.
I think we have time for one more question before we wrap up tonight's program. This question, maybe we can start off with Ruth, and if anyone else wants to dive in, by all means. Question is, your book doesn't dive too much into the role of religion and faith in the lives of Mexican farm workers. Are the churches in Wisconsin dairy town supportive, and are the workers free to worship?
Well, yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think people have become less willing to go out, honestly. Like, there's been a kind of ingathering of the farm workers. Like, I think it was Allison who mentioned that they're living on the property very often. Or no, it was Amanda. Yeah, they're living on the property. And so there's not, on the people that I talk to, not a whole lot of social life, not a whole lot of integration into the community in any fashion. It's really keep your head down and work, save money. So I would say there are definitely very religious people here, and there are people who are, you know, they are people of faith, but there are some church organizations like Carrie Schultz's Lutheran Church that have really done outreach and travel to Mexico and, you know, have sponsored some students down there who are children of farm workers in their area. So there is some of that. And there are some Catholic worker organizations that are amazing and doing amazing, you know, organizing work on farms. So it is a component, and it isn't really a huge part of my book. But yeah, as far as like becoming a member of a congregation in a community and in that way becoming, you know, sort of part of the community, I didn't see a lot of that.
I could say that it's two different groups in the dairy workers. Like one that is being here for longer time and they have families. So those are more like stable here. So they go to some church that they have a Spanish version, you know, like the Spanish bar for them. I've seen that. And yeah, we are very religious, like we are. So, but it's another group of dairy dairy workers that they just live at the farms. Why? Because again, they don't have driver license. And they have to stay at the farm because they don't have another place to go. And the owner or that farm just given a house, so they work all the time, and they are just one person because his family is in Mexico. So they are all the time just right there. And sometimes they go together to Walmart and buy food, and that's it. That is the only way they get out. So it's two different groups. So yeah, the families, yeah, they go to church, the kids go to school, they have sometimes different activities, but those that they are alone here, they just work and live at the farm. So they are isolated there. They don't go anywhere, they don't know about anything, they don't travel, because they just work there because they don't have the opportunity to go into the community and get the resources and anything, just because they don't have a driver license, they cannot drive, or they don't know how to drive, and that's it. Like they have to live there. So yeah.
Anyone else want to add? Before I wrap up, I don't want to cut anyone off short, so I just want to give one more final call if anyone wants to dive in. Otherwise, we will wrap up. All right. How about a round of applause for Ruth Conniff and our panelists? I want to thank each one of them for giving up their time tonight to come out and discuss this very important topic. A few other thank yous and acknowledgments we want to get to before we wrap up. I want to thank again the Beaver Dam Area Community Theater Fine Arts Center for allowing AAUW to come in here tonight and host this event that includes Managing Director David Smith, Coordinator Kim Doyle, and our technicians tonight, Greg Richard and Tommy Scholes. A round of applause for all of them. We also want to highlight the Beaver Dam Area Community Foundation. They graciously offered a grant to AAUW to be able to put on this year's summer read for $1,000 to be able to purchase the books that were provided to all local organizations here in our community. So, round of applause for Beaver Dam Area Community Foundation. And lastly, want to also thank everyone who gave their support to this AAUW and community project. There is a full list of acknowledgements on the program you received tonight, so be sure to check that out. And if you see someone in the community, give them a thanks or a handshake and for being a part of this wonderful evening. Again, if you happen to if you have any friends or neighbors that wanted to be here but couldn't, you can watch the program back on Daily Dodge TV. There is a link on the handout, I believe, that people can go and check out if they want to go back and watch it again, or encourage somebody who wasn't here tonight to watch this program. Also on your agenda and program handout tonight, if you flip to the back side, you'll get a little bit of a tease to what next year's summer read program is highlighting. It's a new opportunity here for AAUW to do something of this nature. It's a Beaver Dam native, John Noltner, who is an award-winning photojournalist and author, will be spending a full week here in the Beaver Dam community. So that's really an awesome and exciting event here next year that's taking place. There's also an opportunity to get involved for anyone's interested in supporting this and really putting the unity in community. There is a contact sheet on your program that you can fill out with your name and information and any comments that you have if you want to get involved in next year's event. Again, that's John Noltner, Beaver Dam native, here coming to Beaver Dam. And also, don't forget, for anyone who brought their copy of Milked here tonight, Ruth Conniff will be doing a book signing here in the lobby that you'll be able to get those books signed. And if you haven't had a chance yet to pick up a copy of the book, you can do so at Rosalie's Book Boutique here in Beaver Dam. I believe that if you have a friend who is interested and you don't want to give up your copy to them, they can go and purchase it themselves at, again, Rosalie's Book Boutique. And in closing this program, and to again underline AAUW's theme, Unity in Community, I've been referred to a quote from somebody that Ruth mentioned a couple times this evening, Sean Duvall, originator of the Bridges Project that gives opportunity for Wisconsin farmers to visit their workers' homeland. In her book, Ruth Conniff shared one of the things that Sean has learned. She said, "I don't have to agree with everybody, but if their heart is true, and I can find a way to love people, it sounds way too lofty for someone who just interpreted, but if there's anything I could wish, it would be that this work would shine a light on how you should treat people." Again, thank you all for coming out tonight and being a part of this program.